Welcome to another deep dive, everyone. Today we are taking a look at a fascinating piece of work called History of Political Philosophy, Considerations on the Relationship Between Philosophy and Politics in the West.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. It was written by Dr. Javad Tabatabai. He's an Iranian political philosopher.
Wow.
And it really challenges a lot of our assumptions about Western political thought.
I see.
I mean, we always talk about this like straight line progression from, ancient Greece to the modern world.
Right.
Yeah.
But
it's a lot messier than that, I imagine.
Exactly. And one of the things that Dr. Tabatabai points out is how often we overlook the role of religious thought in shaping these ideas.
That's interesting, yeah.
So, for instance...
I mean, especially I'm thinking about early Christianity.
Yeah, exactly. He talks about St. Augustine.
Oh, yeah.
In the 5th century.
Right.
We tend to think of him as just a religious figure.
Yeah.
But he was also a significant political thinker.
He was.
Absolutely. And he was wrestling with these questions about how to reconcile divine authority with
earthly power.
Exactly.
Oh, wow.
And, he develops these ideas about just war.
Right.
About the limits of political power that we're still grappling with today.
It's amazing how these ideas from centuries ago still resonate,
Absolutely. And speaking of ideas that have resonated throughout history, I found it really fascinating how Dr. Tabatabai traces the concept of civil society.
Okay.
All the way back to ancient Rome.
Really?
Yeah.
I always thought of civil society as a much more modern concept.
Me too.
Like Enlightenment or something.
Yeah. But he points to how Roman legal thought,
right,
with its distinction between just civil, the law of the city,
right,
and just gentium, the law of nations.
I see.
Kind of contains the seeds of what we understand as civil society today.
Interesting.
Yeah, and it makes you think, how does this historical perspective change our understanding of what civil society is and how it functions? Right, and how it's evolved over time, I imagine.
Yeah.
Wow.
And one of those things that Dr. Tabatabai points out is how this term philosophia civilis, often attributed to Cicero, actually emerged later.
Oh, huh.
Yeah.
So what did it actually mean when it finally appeared? I have to admit, I'm a bit lost there.
Well, philosophia civilis basically means civil philosophy, right?
Okay.
And it was a way of understanding how philosophical principles applied to the practical realities of governing a society.
Ah, I see.
So it's like this bridge between abstract ideals and the concrete challenges of creating a just and functional political order.
So it's not just about the theories of power and justice.
Right.
But about how those theories play out in the real world.
Exactly.
It makes you wonder if our modern understanding of civil society is just another interpretation.
Right. Another layer.
Yeah.
Added to this long historical evolution.
It certainly makes you question the narratives we take for granted. And that's one of Tabatabai's greatest strengths. He encourages us to delve deeper, be skeptical of simplistic narratives, and recognize the complexities of history.
I agree.
Yeah.
And one of the things that he challenges is this assumption that political thought developed primarily in response to changing forms of government.
Okay.
I've always kind of thought that, okay, we had a monarchy, then we had a republic.
Right.
And these shifts in power kind of drove the evolution
of these ideas.
These big ideas about how we should govern ourselves.
Right. So what's he saying instead?
Well, he's saying that, yes, forms of government are influential, but there are other factors at play as well. Like shifts in religious beliefs, technological advancements, the evolution of social structures. All these things contribute to the way we think about power and justice.
So it's not just about who's in charge, but about the broader context.
The broader context, exactly.
Right.
And how that shapes the way we view the world.
That's fascinating. I'd never thought about it that way.
Yeah, and one of the things that he talks about is how this evolution of political philosophy as a distinct discipline. You know how we ended up with courses and textbooks dedicated to thinkers like Machiavelli or Hobbes or Locke.
I see.
I never thought about that as a historical development in itself.
Yeah.
It's like we just assume that, oh, that's how it's always been.
Right.
But he's saying, no, it's
a choice.
It's a choice. It's a product of historical forces.
So it's not just about the ideas themselves, but about how those ideas have been selected, organized, and presented to us.
Exactly.
That's a really thought-provoking point.
And it makes you realize that even our understanding of history is shaped by those who write about it.
Right. It's not a neutral or objective process.
Right. We're not just passively absorbing facts.
Yeah.
We're engaging with interpretations, with narratives.
Narratives that have been constructed, often with implicit biases.
Absolutely. And that's why I think Dr. Tabatai's work is so important.
Yeah.
Because he's challenging us to be critical readers of history, to question the narratives that we inherit, and to be open to alternative interpretations.
I like that.
And one of the things that he challenges is this notion that there's a clear distinction between philosophical and political writing.
Oh, interesting.
You know, we often attribute that to Aristotle.
Right.
Like, he's the one who divided knowledge into these neat categories.
So what's Tabatabai's take on that?
Well, he dives into how, in ancient Greece, philosophy really encompassed all areas of knowledge, including politics. It wasn't about drawing these rigid boundaries.
So it was more about exploring the interconnectedness of different fields of inquiry?
It's like saying that politics wasn't seen as a separate sphere from philosophy.
Right.
It was all part of this larger quest for understanding the world and our place within it. And Dr. Tabatabai argues that this separation that we see today with political science as its own distinct discipline, that's a later development. It makes you wonder, you know, have we lost something by creating these artificial divisions between different fields of knowledge?
That's a really provocative question.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I have an answer, but it's something worth pondering.
Absolutely. And one of the things that Dr. Tabatabai points out is how the Renaissance, you know, with its rediscovery of classical texts and its emphasis on humanism, kind of lays the foundation for a new era of political thinking. Right.
So it's like they were having a conversation across centuries, bringing ancient wisdom into dialogue with the realities of the Renaissance world.
Exactly. And this re-engagement with classical thought, coupled with all of the social and political upheavals of the time, you know, really kind of sparks fresh debates about power.
About governance.
About governance, about the nature of the state.
So it wasn't just a revival of old ideas. It was a reinterpretation, a reimagining of those ideas in a new context.
Exactly.
And that reinterpretation had profound consequences, didn't it?
It did. And one of the things that leads to is a renewed emphasis on the concept of individual rights, which kind of brings us back to this idea of civil society, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
I see the connection.
So the Renaissance, in a way, sets the stage for the emergence of a more robust concept of civil society.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm starting to see how all of these pieces fit together.
Yeah.
How these seemingly disparate ideas and historical periods are actually interconnected.
Absolutely.
It's like a giant puzzle where each piece illuminates the others.
I love that analogy.
It's all about connections and relationships.
And Dr. Tababai does such a brilliant job of highlighting those connections.
He does, yeah.
You know, he really kind of guides us through this intricate tapestry of ideas.
Yeah, and helps us to see the patterns that might otherwise be hidden.
Okay, so let's dig a little deeper into this civil society thread.
Okay.
Dr. Tabatabai keeps circling back to this idea.
Yeah.
Why is it so central to his analysis?
To his analysis of the history of political thought.
Well, he sees civil society as this space where the tensions between individual autonomy and state power play out.
I see.
It's the realm where we negotiate the boundaries of freedom.
Right.
Where we form voluntary associations, we express our opinions.
We hold power accountable.
We hold power accountable, exactly.
So it's like the arena where the individual and the state are constantly interacting.
Yes.
Pushing against each other and ultimately shaping each other.
Exactly. And understanding the historical development of civil society is crucial for understanding its significance today.
I agree. And I'm curious about how he uses the evolution of the term subject to demonstrate how this relationship has shifted over time.
Oh, the word subject. Like being subject to a king or a law or something like that.
Exactly. What's so significant about that?
Well, in the Middle Ages, being a subject actually had connotations of power and autonomy.
Really?
Within the feudal system.
Oh, interesting.
It implied a reciprocal relationship between the ruler and the ruled.
I see.
But with the rise of absolute monarchy, the term takes on a different meaning.
What does it become associated with then?
Submission.
Okay.
Obedience to the sovereign.
So it's a subtle shift in language, but it reflects a major shift in power dynamics, right?
Exactly. The term subject becomes less about a dynamic relationship and more about a hierarchical one.
Wow, that's fascinating.
And this shift,
Right.
of course, has a huge impact on the development of civil society.
Yeah.
Right? As the state becomes more powerful,
Yeah.
the space for civil society,
Yeah.
that realm of voluntary associations and individual autonomy,
Yes.
comes under pressure.
It becomes a site of contestation, a place where the limits of state power are negotiated and redefined.
Exactly.
That makes so much sense.
It's like civil society is constantly pushing back against the encroaching power of the state.
Yeah.
Trying to carve out space
Yeah.
for individual freedom and collective action.
That's a great way to visualize it, that tension, that dynamic interplay
Right.
between the individual, the state, and civil society.
It's a recurring theme throughout Dr. Tabatabai's analysis.
That's really insightful.
And it makes you realize that civil society isn't just some abstract concept.
Right.
It's the battleground
Yeah.
where these big ideas about power and freedom and the role of the state actually play out in the real world.
That's a great point. And it highlights why understanding the historical evolution of civil society is so essential for understanding its contemporary significance.
Okay, so if civil society is this space where individuals and the state are constantly negotiating their relationship, where do legal systems fit into this picture? You know, I mean, it seems like they could either reinforce state power
Right.
or protect individual rights, depending on,
Yeah.
how they're structured.
On how they're implemented.
Exactly.
So-
That's a good observation.
And Dr. Tabatabai argues that the development of Western legal traditions
Why?
played a crucial role in shaping the contours of civil society.
I've never thought about it that way.
So how did legal systems actually shape the boundaries and possibilities of civil society?
That's a big question.
Yeah.
Maybe we could start with the emphasis on individual rights,
Okay.
particularly property rights that emerged during the Renaissance and the Enlightenment.
Okay.
This provided a legal framework
Right.
for individuals to act autonomously to form
Yeah.
voluntary associations. It gave them a stronger legal basis to operate outside the direct control of the state.
So those legal frameworks, in a way, carved out a protected space for civil society to exist and operate.
Precisely. It wasn't always a smooth or consistent process, but those legal developments were crucial for the growth of civil society,
Right.
as we understand it today.
But it's not as simple as saying that legal systems
Right.
automatically protect civil society.
Right.
No, of course not. Laws can also be used to restrict individual freedoms, to limit the scope of collective action.
Exactly. And Dr. Tababai doesn't shy away from this complexity.
Right.
He reminds us that law is a powerful tool
It is,
that can be wielded in different ways,
depending on...
depending on the political context and
Yeah.
the interests at play.
Exactly. And that's why understanding the historical evolution of legal systems alongside the concept of civil society is crucial
Right.
for navigating the
Yeah.
complexities of political life today.
This is all incredibly fascinating.
Yeah.
I have to admit, I'm struggling a bit to keep all of these threads.
Yeah. Yeah.
In my head, we've gone from ancient Greece to Rome.
We've talked about Christianity.
We've talked about Christianity.
We've jumped to the Renaissance
Now we're talking about legal systems
and civil society.
and civil society.
It's a lot.
It is.
But I think that's what makes this book so engaging. It's
Yeah.
this rich tapestry of ideas and historical periods all woven together.
It is. And speaking of weaving together different threads,
Yes.
where does Dr. Tabatabai's own background as an Iranian scholar fit into all of this?
Well, that's a great question.
No,
It's key to understanding his unique approach, isn't it?
absolutely.
It challenges us to see Western and non-Western thought not as separate,
Right.
not as isolated entities.
But as part of a larger conversation.
A global conversation, a cross-cultural exchange of ideas that transcends geographical boundaries.
Exactly.
I'm starting to see how this perspective really enriches our understanding
Yeah.
of the history of political thought.
It's like we're zooming out,
Yeah.
expanding the frame
Depending the
to
frame.
see the bigger picture,
Yeah.
the interconnectedness of
Yeah.
different cultures and intellectual traditions.
And that broader perspective is essential for understanding the complexities and nuances of the history of political thought.
Okay, I'm starting to get a better grasp
Yeah.
of Dr. Tabatabai's approach. Yeah. He's not just summarizing the history of political thought.
Right. He's re-examining it,
Yeah.
challenging our assumptions.
And showing us how these ideas have evolved in a much more complex and interconnected way
Exactly.
than we might have imagined.
We might have imagined.
And he's not afraid to acknowledge the messy realities of history, right?
Absolutely. He acknowledges the contradictions, the power struggles, the biases that have shaped the evolution of these ideas.
It's not a sanitized version of history.
Right.
He's showing us the good, the bad, and the ugly, and encouraging us to grapple with it all.
And that's what makes his work so thought-provoking.
It is.
It's not just a history lesson.
Right.
It's a challenge to think critically about the ideas that have shaped our world and to consider how we might use our understanding of the past to create a better future.
That's a great way to frame it. And it highlights the importance of engaging with the history of political thought not as a passive exercise, but as an active process of inquiry, reflection, and ultimately action.
So it's not just about learning what these thinkers said,
but about asking ourselves what those ideas mean for us today.
Yeah.
How they might inform our understanding of the world.
Absolutely.
And how we might use them to create a more just and equitable society.
Precisely. And that's where the real value of Dr. Tabatabai's work lies. He's not just offering us a history lesson.
Right.
He's providing us with the intellectual tools.
Yeah.
We need to be active and engaged citizens in the 21st century.
Okay, before we dive too far into the present, I want to circle back to that intriguing point about the evolution of the term subject. You mentioned that it went from signifying a more reciprocal relationship in the Middle Ages to a more hierarchical one with the rise of absolute monarchy.
Yes. So how did that shift in meaning actually play out in the real world?
Well, think about the feudal system in the Middle Ages.
Yeah.
You know, while there was a hierarchy with lords and vassals, the relationship was also characterized by mutual obligations and a degree of autonomy for those lower down the social ladder.
So it wasn't just a one-way street of power flowing from the top down.
Exactly. Vassals owed loyalty and service to their lords. But lords also had responsibilities to protect their vassals and to uphold their rights within that feudal system.
It sounds like a more negotiated form of power, where the subject had some leverage, some ability to push back against the demands of authority.
That's a great way to put it.
So what changes with the rise of absolute monarchy?
Well, kings began to assert their divine right to rule, claiming absolute authority over their subjects. This shift was accompanied by a centralization of power, the development of standing armies, and the erosion of those traditional checks and balances.
So the subject becomes less of a participant in a reciprocal relationship and more of a subordinate, someone whose primary duty is to obey the sovereign.
Exactly. And this transformation is reflected in the language of the time. You know, in the way the term subject is used to emphasize obedience and submission.
I'm starting to see how even a seemingly simple shift in language can reveal profound changes.
Absolutely.
In the distribution of power and the nature of the relationship between the individual and the state.
Okay, so let's connect this back to civil society.
Okay.
How does this shift from a more reciprocal to a more hierarchical relationship between individuals and the state impact the development of civil society?
That's where it gets really interesting. As the state consolidates its power and asserts its absolute authority, the space for civil society. That realm of voluntary associations, independent thought, and collective action becomes more contested.
So it's like the state is trying to assert its control over all aspects of social life. And civil society is pushing back.
Trying to carve out space for autonomy and freedom.
Exactly. It's a dynamic tension.
A
constant push and pull between the state's desire for control and the individual's desire for freedom.
It sounds like a never-ending struggle, a battle that's been raging for centuries.
It certainly is. And understanding this historical tension is crucial for understanding challenges and opportunities facing civil society today.
That makes sense.
Okay, now I want to bring in another layer to this conversation. What about the role of religion? You know, Dr. Tabatabai is an Iranian scholar. Iran is a predominantly Muslim country. How does he approach the relationship between religion and political thought?
That's a great question.
Especially given, you know, the Western focus of this book.
It gets to the heart of what makes his perspective so unique, doesn't it?
It does.
He's analyzing Western political thought, but he's doing so from a vantage point that allows him to see connections and influences that might be less obvious to those steeped in the Western tradition.
So he's not just presenting a Westernized view of history.
He's bringing in a broader perspective.
Exactly.
One that's informed by his own cultural and intellectual background.
And he's highlighting how these seemingly distinct traditions have actually interacted and influenced each other throughout history.
That's fascinating.
It is. He shows us how ideas have flowed back and forth across cultures, shaping and reshaping our understanding of power and justice and the meaning of a good life.
So it's not just about the West versus the rest.
Yes.
It's about recognizing the interconnectedness of different cultures and intellectual traditions.
Exactly. Okay, before we get too deep into the weeds of specific historical examples, I want to bring it back to a more personal level. Dr. Tabatabai's book is about the history of political thought. But ultimately, it's about human beings.
Yeah.
Grappling with these fundamental questions about how we should live together.
Yeah.
How we should govern ourselves.
Right.
What kind of world we want to create.
What do you think are the most important takeaways for someone trying to make sense of those questions in today's world?
Oh, that's a great question. I think one of the most important takeaways is the need to embrace complexity. Dr. Tabatabai shows us that there are no easy answers to these big questions about power and justice and freedom.
So it's not about finding the one right answer, the one perfect system.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that there are always trade-offs, compromises, different perspectives to consider.
It sounds like a call for humility, a reminder that we don't have all the answers.
It is.
And that's a valuable lesson in itself, I think.
And I think another crucial takeaway is the need to be critical readers of history.
Okay.
Of the narratives we inherit.
Yeah.
And of the ideas that shape our understanding of the world.
So we need to question everything, dig deeper, and be open to alternative interpretations.
Exactly.
That's a tall order, but it's essential, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
It's like he's saying that we need to be active participants. In the conversation.
Not just passive recipients.
Not just passive recipients.
Not just passive recipients. Of information.
Of information, exactly. We need to bring our own critical thinking skills.
To the table.
To the table,
And to engage in a thoughtful
and nuanced
dialogue with the past.
And that dialogue, in turn, can help us to navigate the challenges and opportunities of the present.
That makes sense.
So it's not just about learning what happened in the past. It's about using our understanding of history.
To inform our decisions.
To inform our decisions and actions.
In action present.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I think Dr. Tabatabai's work is a call to action.
I agree.
He's encouraging us to use our knowledge, our understanding, and our critical thinking skills.
Yes.
To build a better world.
To build a better world.
One that is more just, more equitable, and more humane for all.
And that's a message that I think resonates deeply with what we're trying to do here on this deep dive.
We want to empower listeners to be active and engaged citizens, to grapple with complex ideas, and to contribute to the ongoing conversation about how we can create a better future.
I completely agree. And Dr. Tabatabai's work provides us with the intellectual tools we need to engage in that conversation meaningfully and effectively.
Okay, as we wrap up this first part of our deep dive. I want to circle back to that intriguing point about the interconnectedness of Western and non-Western thought.
Yeah, it's such a crucial insight.
You mentioned the influence of the Persian philosopher Al-Farabi on medieval European thought.
Yeah.
Can you give me a little more background on Al-Farabi and explain why his work was so influential in the West?
Absolutely. So Al-Farabi was born around 870 CE.
Okay.
In present-day Kazakhstan. And he was a towering figure in Islamic philosophy.
Wow.
He was a polymath.
Yeah.
His work spanned logic and metaphysics and ethics and politics.
So he was a bridge builder, connecting different intellectual traditions. Precisely. And his work had a profound impact on medieval European thinkers.
Oh, wow.
For instance, his ideas about the ideal city-state, the role of the philosopher king, and the importance of justice and virtue in governance influenced Christian philosophers like Thomas Aquinas.
It's fascinating to think about how ideas can travel across cultures and time periods influencing the course of history in unexpected ways.
In unexpected ways, absolutely. And Al-Farabi's influence in the West is just one example of this rich and complex interplay between Western and non-Western thought.
It's a reminder that we need to broaden our horizons when studying the history of ideas.
Absolutely, to look beyond the traditional boundaries of the Western canon, and to appreciate the diversity of voices and perspectives that have shaped our intellectual landscape.
That's a great point.
Okay, as we wrap up this first part of our deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a question to ponder. We've talked about how Dr. Tabatabai challenges the traditional narrative of the history of political thought, highlighting its complexities, its interconnectedness, and the often overlooked influence of religious and non-Western thought.
It's a powerful argument.
It is. So my question for you, dear listener, is this. How does this new perspective, this reframing of the history of political thought, change your understanding of the ideas and debates that shape our world today?
It's a great question to ponder, and it's one that we'll continue to explore as we delve deeper into Dr. Tabatabai's work in the next part of our deep dive.
I can't wait to continue this conversation.
So picking up right where we left off, it's fascinating how Dr. Tabatabai challenges us to see the history of political thought, not as this neat little package story, but as a vibrant, messy, global conversation.
That really struck me too. We often get stuck in this West versus the rest mentality, assuming there's this clear divide. But Tabatabai shows us
it's way more fluid.
It's far more fluid than that.
Yeah.
He points to figures like Al-Farabi to show how intertwined these traditions really are.
Absolutely.
It makes you wonder what other voices and influences have we missed by sticking to a narrow view of history.
It's a great question.
I'm curious about how Dr. Tabatabai, as an Iranian scholar, navigates the relationship between political thought and religion. Especially within the Western tradition. It's a topic that's often loaded with assumptions.
With preconceptions.
Preconceptions.
And that's where his perspective, I think, becomes truly insightful. He doesn't shy away from the influence of Christianity on Western political thought, tracing it from the early church fathers all the way through the Reformation.
So he's acknowledging that religion has played a major role in shaping political ideas.
Absolutely.
Even in the West, where we often like to think of these spheres as separate.
Exactly. He shows how religious doctrines and values have been deeply intertwined with debates about authority, power, and justice. Think about concepts like natural law. Often rooted in religious beliefs, have been used to justify everything from monarchical rule to revolutionary movements.
It makes you realize that understanding political thought requires understanding its religious context.
I completely agree.
And Tabatabai doesn't stop there. He also explores the relationship between political thought and Islam.
Oh, interesting.
Highlighting the rich intellectual traditions within the Islamic world.
So he's not just focusing on the West. He's broadening the conversation to include different religious and cultural perspectives.
Exactly. And he doesn't present these traditions as monolithic blocks. He digs into the internal debates and complexities within both Christian and Islamic thought, showing how they've grappled with similar questions.
What about?
About power, justice, the meaning of a good life.
It's a really fascinating comparative approach.
It is.
I think it highlights the shared humanity that underlies these different traditions.
This is all incredibly fascinating. But I have to admit, I'm starting to feel a bit overwhelmed.
I hear you. It's a lot to take in.
We've talked about ancient Greece and Rome. Rome, Christianity, Islam.
We've got Al-Farabi and Thomas Aquinas.
Yeah.
It's a whirlwind tour of intellectual history.
It is a whirlwind tour. How does someone who's not a scholar of political philosophy even begin to wrap their head around all of this?
That's a common feeling when exploring such a rich and layered topic.
Yeah.
But that's where Tabatabai's skill as a writer really comes in. He manages to make these complex ideas accessible without oversimplifying them.
He's not talking down to his readers. He's meeting them where they are.
Exactly.
And guiding them through this intellectual journey.
He uses clear language, vivid examples, compelling narratives. To draw readers in, he helps us see how these seemingly abstract debates are actually connected to the very real questions we face today. About how we should live together, how we should govern ourselves, what kind of world we want to create.
So he's not just presenting a dry academic history.
No, not at all.
He's making it relevant, showing us why these ideas matter.
He's helping us to see that the history of political thought is not just a dusty relic of the past. It's a living conversation that continues to shape our understanding of the world.
And our place within it.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm starting to see how Tabatabai's approach can be both intellectually stimulating and personally meaningful.
It's a rare combination.
It is.
But let's get back to the content for a moment. We've touched on the concept of civil society and its evolution.
Yeah.
But I want to dig a little deeper. What specifically piques your interest? There's so much to unpack.
Well, we've talked about how civil society is this space where individuals and the state interact.
Right.
Where the boundaries of freedom are negotiated.
Yeah.
But I'm curious about its potential downsides or limitations. Is there a dark side to civil society?
That's a brilliant question.
Yeah.
You know, Tabatabai doesn't shy away from the complexities of this concept. He acknowledges that civil society, while often a force for good, can also be a site of exclusion inequality and even oppression.
So it's not always this utopian space where everyone gets along and works together for the common good.
Not at all. Think about it. Civil society is made up of a diverse range of groups and individuals, each with their own interests, values, and agendas, and these groups don't always play nice.
Can you give me a specific example of how civil society can go wrong?
Absolutely. Historically, many groups and movements that we would now consider oppressive or harmful operated within the framework of civil society. Think about groups that advocated for slavery, segregation, or the suppression of women's rights. They often organized, mobilized, and lobbied for their agendas within the space of civil society.
That's a sobering thought. It makes you realize that civil society isn't inherently good or bad.
Right.
It's a tool.
It's a tool, a platform.
Yeah.
And like any tool, it can be used for different purposes.
And it's up to us as citizens to be aware of these complexities, to engage critically with the different groups and movements that operate within civil society.
Yes.
And to work towards creating a more just and inclusive space for all.
I couldn't agree more.
So it's about being discerning, about not just assuming that any group or movement that claims to represent civil society is automatically on the side of the good guys.
Exactly. It's about doing our homework, about examining the values and agendas of different groups, and about being willing to challenge those that are harmful or unjust.
Okay, I'm starting to see how civil society is a much more nuanced and complex concept than I initially thought.
It's not a simple solution to the problem of power. It's a space where the struggle for power continues to play out both positive and negative consequences.
And this brings us back to Dr. Tabatabai's central argument.
Yes.
That the history of political thought is not a linear progression, but a messy, interconnected, global conversation. How does this understanding change the way we approach the study of political ideas?
I think it challenges us to move beyond simplistic narratives and to embrace a more nuanced, expansive view of history. It encourages us to look for connections, influences, and counter-narratives.
Counter-narratives,
that might have been overlooked or marginalized by traditional accounts.
So it's about expanding the canon, about bringing in new voices and perspectives that challenge the dominant narratives.
Precisely. It's about recognizing that the history of political thought is a global conversation, a tapestry woven from threads of different cultures, religions, and intellectual traditions.
And Dr. Tabatabai, as an Iranian scholar, is uniquely positioned to guide us through this intricate tapestry.
He brings a perspective that enriches and challenges our understanding of these complex ideas.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about one of the most significant developments in the history of Western political thought.
Go.
The emergence of the concept of the state as a distinct entity with its own rights and powers.
It's something we take for granted today, but it's fascinating to think about how that concept evolved over time.
It is fascinating, and Dr. Tabatabai traces this development, showing how the idea of the state emerged from earlier conceptions of political community, like the Greek polis or the Roman Republic. And he highlights how the modern state, with its centralized power and its claim to absolute sovereignty, is a relatively recent phenomenon.
So the state, as we understand it today, wasn't always there. It evolved over time, shaped by various forces and ideas.
Precisely. And he shows how this evolution was influenced by everything from religious beliefs and warfare to economic developments and the growth of legal systems.
It makes you realize that the state is not some fixed, unchanging entity. It's a product of history, a reflection of the power dynamics and social values of its time.
And understanding this history is crucial for making sense of the role that the state plays in our lives today. And for thinking critically about how we might reform or reimagine the state.
To better serve the needs of its citizens.
To better serve the needs of its citizens, exactly.
That's a crucial point.
So it's not just about understanding how the state came to be. But about thinking about what kind of state we want to have in the future.
And that's where the history of political thought can be so valuable.
It can.
It provides us with a range of perspectives on the role of the state, its relationship to its citizens, and the possibilities for creating a more just and equitable society.
Okay, I'm seeing how understanding the historical evolution of the state can help us to think more critically about its role in our lives today.
It gives us a framework for understanding the present.
It does.
And for imagining a better future.
But let's bring this back to Dr. Tabatabai's work. What's his take on the relationship between the individual and the state?
That's a core theme that runs throughout his analysis. He explores how different thinkers across different time periods and cultures have grappled with this fundamental tension between individual freedom and the authority of the state.
So it's a debate that's been going on for centuries, a conversation that's still very much alive today.
Absolutely. And he doesn't present a simple one-size-fits-all answer.
Right.
Instead, he shows us how different thinkers have approached this tension, offering a range of perspectives and insights.
Can you give me some examples of how different thinkers have framed this relationship?
Sure. Think about Aristotle, who believed in the importance of civic virtue and active participation in government.
Okay.
He saw the state as a means for individuals to achieve their full potential as citizens to live a life of purpose and meaning within a community.
It sounds like a very communitarian view.
It is.
One where the individual's well-being is closely tied to the well-being of the community as a whole.
Exactly. Now, contrast that with Thomas Hobbes, who had a much more pessimistic view of human nature.
Okay.
He saw the state as a necessary evil. A leviathan needed to keep individuals in check and prevent society from descending into chaos.
So for Hobbes, it's all about maintaining order, even if it means sacrificing some individual freedom.
That's a good way to put it. And then you have someone like John Locke, who championed individual rights and limited government. Right. He saw the state as a protector of individual liberties, not as a source of oppression.
So for Locke, the state is there to serve the individual, not the other way around.
Precisely. And these are just a few examples of the many different ways that thinkers have approached this relationship between the individual and the state.
It's amazing to think about how these ideas developed centuries ago are still relevant for understanding our own relationship to the state today.
I agree. It's a testament to the enduring power of these ideas.
And Dr. Tabatabai helps us to see those connections, to understand how the ideas of the past continue to shape our world in the present.
Yeah, he's a master at weaving together the historical and the contemporary.
Okay, I'm starting to see how the history of political thought can be both intellectually fascinating and personally relevant.
It's a potent combination.
It is. But I have to admit, sometimes when I'm reading about these big ideas, I get lost in the abstract theories and the philosophical jargon.
I understand it can be daunting.
How does Dr. Tabatabai make these ideas relatable? How does he connect them to the real world?
That's a great question. And one of his strengths as a writer is his ability to weave together historical analysis, philosophical insight, and real-world examples to make these ideas come alive.
Can you give me a specific example of how he does that?
Absolutely. Think about his discussion of the concept of power.
Okay.
He doesn't just define power in abstract terms.
Right.
He shows us how power operates in different contexts, from the machinations of Machiavelli's prince to the subtle forms of social control explored by Michel Foucault.
So he's not just giving us dictionary definitions. He's showing us how power actually works, how it shapes our lives and our relationships.
Precisely. And he encourages us to become more aware of the ways in which power operates, not just in the halls of government, but in our everyday lives, in our interactions with each other, and in the very language we use.
It sounds like a call for critical awareness.
It is.
A reminder that power isn't just something that other people have.
Right.
It's something that circulates throughout society, and we're all implicated in its dynamics.
Exactly. And that awareness, that critical engagement with the concept of power is essential for becoming informed and engaged citizens.
Okay, I'm starting to see how even the most abstract philosophical ideas can have real-world implications.
They can be incredibly powerful.
They can.
But let's shift our focus to another key concept, justice.
Okay.
It seems like every political debate eventually boils down to questions of justice.
It does.
How does Dr. Tabatabai approach this complex and often contested concept?
He traces the evolution of the idea of justice from ancient Greek conceptions of fairness and balance to modern theories of distributive justice and human rights.
Right.
He shows us how different thinkers have wrestled with the question of what constitutes a just society.
Yeah.
And how those conceptions of justice have changed over time.
So it's not just about one definition of justice. It's about understanding how different cultures and different historical periods have approached this concept.
Exactly. He helps us to see that justice is not a static concept, but rather it's something that's constantly evolving and being debated.
That's a really important point.
Can you give me some examples of how different thinkers have defined justice?
Absolutely. Think about John Rawls, who developed a theory of justice based on fairness and equality of opportunity.
Okay.
He argued that a just society is one where everyone has an equal chance to succeed, regardless of their background or circumstances.
So it's about leveling the playing field.
Yeah.
About creating a society where everyone has a fair shot.
That's a good way to put it. And then you have someone like Martha Nussbaum, who has developed a theory of human capabilities. She argues that justice requires ensuring that all individuals have the resources and opportunities they need to live a flourishing life, a life worthy of human dignity.
So it's not just about equality opportunity.
Right.
It's about ensuring that everyone has the basic capabilities they need to live a good life.
Exactly. And these are just two examples of the many different ways that thinkers have approached the concept of justice.
It's amazing to think about how these different conceptions of justice have shaped our world, from the laws we create to the social movements we join.
I agree. It's a testament to the power of ideas.
And Dr. Tabatabai's analysis helps us to understand the historical roots of these ideas and to engage in the ongoing debate about what justice means in our own time.
It's an invitation to participate in that conversation.
It is.
To contribute our own voices and perspectives.
Okay, I'm seeing how the history of political thought can provide us with a richer and more nuanced understanding of concepts like power and justice.
It's a powerful lens for understanding the world.
It is. But I have to admit, I'm also starting to feel a bit overwhelmed by the sheer scope of this subject.
I hear you. It's a lot to take in.
It's a lot to take in.
It's a vast and complex subject, but remember, one of the key takeaways from Dr. Tabatabai's work is that embracing complexity is essential for understanding the world around us.
So it's not about simplifying things. It's about learning to appreciate the nuances and the interconnectedness of different ideas.
Exactly. And that's a skill that's valuable not just for understanding political thought, but for navigating life in general.
Okay. That's a reassuring thought. But let's not get too philosophical here. I want to bring our conversation back to a more concrete level.
Okay.
We've talked about how the state evolved over time.
Right.
But what about the concept of civil society? How has that concept changed in the face of globalization?
That's a great question. Globalization has had a profound impact on civil society.
It has.
Both in positive and negative ways. On the one hand, it's created new opportunities for transnational activism, for people across different countries to connect and collaborate on issues of shared concern.
So it's like globalization has expanded the reach of civil society, allowing it to transcend national boundaries.
Exactly. Think about the global movements for climate justice, human rights, or economic equality. These movements are powered by networks of individuals and organizations from around the world working together to challenge global power structures and to create a more just and sustainable world.
That's incredibly inspiring.
It's a testament to the power of collective action.
But I imagine globalization also presents challenges to civil society.
It certainly does. One of the biggest challenges is the rise of multinational corporations and the growing influence of corporate power. You know, these corporations often operate with little accountability, prioritizing profit over people and the planet.
So it's like globalization has created new power centers that are often outside the reach of traditional forms of democratic accountability.
That's a major concern, and it's something that Dr. Tabatabai addresses in his work. He does.
He encourages us to think critically about the impact of globalization on civil society, to be aware of both the opportunities and the challenges it presents.
So it's about being discerning, about recognizing that globalization is not inherently good or bad, but rather it's a force that can be shaped and directed in different ways.
Exactly. And it's up to us as citizens to engage in the debates about globalization, to advocate for policies that promote a more just and sustainable global order, and to work towards creating a world where the benefits of globalization are shared more equitably.
Okay, I'm starting to see how the history of political thought can help us to understand and navigate the complex realities of globalization.
It provides us with a framework for analysis.
It does, and for action.
But I want to bring you back to Dr. Tabatabay's work. What makes his analysis of the history of political thought so compelling and relevant for us today?
I think it's his ability to connect the past to the present.
Okay.
He's not just presenting a dry academic history of ideas. He's weaving together historical analysis, philosophical insight, and real-world examples to show us how these ideas have shaped our world and how they continue to influence our lives today.
So he's making the history of political thought come alive.
Yeah.
Showing us why it matters.
Exactly, and he's doing it in a way that's both intellectually rigorous and accessible to a wide audience.
It sounds like he's bridging the gap between academia and the public sphere.
He is.
Inviting everyone to participate in this conversation about the big ideas that shape our world.
That's a great way to put it, and that's what makes his work so valuable.
Yeah.
He's not just talking to other scholars.
Right.
He's talking to all of us.
Yeah.
Inviting us to engage in the ongoing conversation about power justice and the meaning of a good life.
Okay, before we move on, I want to take a moment to address our listeners directly.
Okay.
You might be thinking, this is all very interesting, but what does it have to do with me?
Right. A fair question.
And that's a fair question, but here's the thing. The history of political thought is not just about dusty old books and dead philosophers.
Yeah.
It's about the ideas that have shaped our world, the ideas that continue to influence our lives today, the ideas that we use to make sense of everything from our relationship to the government to our understanding of right and wrong.
It's the foundation of our political and social world.
It is.
And understanding that foundation is crucial for understanding who we are and where we're going.
So by engaging with this history, even if it seems daunting at first, you're actually engaging with the very foundations of our political and social world.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that the ideas of the past are not just relics.
Right.
They're living forces that continue to shape our present and our future.
And by understanding how those ideas have evolved, how they've been debated and contested,
yes,
we can become more informed and engaged citizens better equipped to navigate the complexities of the world around us.
It's about empowerment.
It is about empowerment.
Giving people the tools they need to think critically and to make a difference.
Okay, now that we've addressed our listeners directly, let's get back to Dr. Tabatabai's work.
Okay.
We've talked about civil society, the state, globalization, power, justice.
Big concepts.
These are all huge concepts.
Yeah.
But he also digs into specific historical examples, exploring the lives and ideas of individual thinkers who've shaped the course of political thought.
He does, and that's one of the things that makes his work so engaging.
Yeah.
He's not just presenting abstract theories, he's bringing these ideas to life through the stories of real people who wrestled with these questions, who challenged the status quo, and who left their mark on history.
Can you give me an example of one of those thinkers and explain why their work is relevant for us today?
Sure. One figure that Tabatabai explores in depth is Niccolò Machiavelli.
Okay.
The Renaissance-era Italian diplomat and political philosopher, best known for his book, The Prince.
Ah, Machiavelli.
Yeah.
He's the guy who's often portrayed as a cynical manipulator who believes that the ends justify the means.
He is often portrayed that way.
Isn't he a bit of a controversial figure to be holding up as a role model?
He certainly is, but that's what makes him so fascinating. And Tabatabai doesn't shy away from the complexities, controversies surrounding Machiavelli's work.
He acknowledges that Machiavelli's analysis of power can be unsettling, especially his willingness to condone deception and ruthlessness in the pursuit of political goals.
He doesn't sugarcoat Machiavelli's ideas.
So he's not sugarcoating Machiavelli's ideas. He's presenting them in all their rawness.
Exactly. But he also helps us to understand Machiavelli's context, the turbulent political landscape of Renaissance Italy.
Right.
Where city-states were constantly vying for power and survival.
So Machiavelli was writing from a place of experience of having seen firsthand the brutal realities of power politics.
Precisely. And Tabatabai argues that while Machiavelli's methods might be morally questionable, his insights into the nature of power and the dynamics of political leadership remain relevant today.
So even though we might not agree with his methods, we can still learn from his observations about how power operates.
Absolutely. Think about Machiavelli's emphasis on the importance of understanding human nature. The role of deception and manipulation in politics, and the need for a leader to be both feared and loved.
Right.
These insights, while perhaps unsettling, are still relevant for understanding the political landscape today.
It's like he's giving us a glimpse behind the curtain, showing us how power actually works, even if it's not always pretty.
That's a great way to put it. And that's why Machiavelli remains such a compelling figure even centuries after his death. His work forces us to confront the uncomfortable realities of power and to think critically about the relationship between ethics and politics.
Okay, I'm starting to see how engaging with the ideas of thinkers like Machiavelli can help us to become more astute observers of the political world around us.
It sharpens our vision.
It does.
It helps us to see the world more clearly.
But it's also a bit disillusioning, isn't it?
It can be.
It's like we're learning that power is often about manipulation and self-interest.
Right.
Not about idealism and the common good.
That can be a challenging realization, but I think Tabatabai's point is not to make us cynical or disillusioned. It's to encourage us to be more aware, more discerning, and more strategic in our own engagement with power.
So it's about recognizing that the world is not always a fair or just place.
Right.
But that doesn't mean we have to give up on our ideals.
No, not at all.
It means we need to be smart about how we pursue them.
Exactly. It's about using our understanding of power, of the strategies and tactics that are often employed in the political sphere, to work towards creating a world that is more more equitable.
And more humane.
And more humane.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm starting to see how even the most cynical and seemingly pessimistic analyses of power can actually be empowering.
They can be.
They can give us the tools we need to navigate the complexities of the political world and to work towards positive change.
I think that's a really important insight.
And it highlights why it's so important to engage with a wide range of thinkers.
Yes.
Even those whose ideas we might initially find challenging or even reprehensible.
It's about expanding our horizons.
It is.
And challenging our own assumptions.
So it's about being open-minded, about not just dismissing ideas that we disagree with,
right,
but about trying to understand them, to see what we can learn from them, and to use that knowledge to build a better world.
Beautifully said. I couldn't agree more. It did have a huge impact. And without those scholars, really, who knows where Western philosophy would be today?
It's amazing to think about how, one civilization scholarship can have such a ripple effect across time and cultures.
It is, and it underscores that point about interconnectedness, that we've been talking about.
Yeah, I'm starting to see how this broader perspective, this recognition that, intellectual traditions aren't isolated,
right,
can really deepen our understanding of how ideas evolve and spread.
It definitely adds a whole new layer of nuance
It does.
to the story.
But, okay, let's bring it back to the present for a moment.
Okay.
How does this historical understanding, this deep dive into, centuries of political thought actually help us make sense of the world we live in today?
Well, that's where the rubber meets the road, right?
Yeah.
Dr. Tabatabai isn't just giving us an academic exercise, he's giving us tools, intellectual tools.
I like that.
To grapple with the very real challenges of our time.
What kind of challenges are you thinking about?
Everything from the rise of populism, increasing distrust of institutions, the growing gap between the haves and have-nots.
So he's not just, giving us a history lesson, he's actually equipping us to be more informed and engaged citizens.
Exactly. He's showing us how those ideas from the past, about power, justice, freedom, the role of the state, the nature of civil society, they're all still very much alive.
But they're still relevant.
And relevant in the 21st century.
Absolutely. Can you give me a specific example of how, this historical understanding can actually inform how we understand an issue that we're facing today?
Sure. Think about all the debates happening right now about democracy.
Okay.
All around the world.
Yeah.
By understanding how that very concept of democracy has evolved over time, from ancient Greece to its various forms in the modern world.
Right.
We get a clearer picture. We can see both its strengths and weaknesses.
So it's not just about celebrating, the triumphs of democracy.
Right.
It's about understanding that it's fragile.
Exactly.
And that it can be undermined, and that there's this constant struggle to make it more just and more equitable.
It's an ongoing process.
Yeah, and that's just one example. We could apply this historical lens to so many issues that we're grappling with today.
Oh, absolutely. Economic inequality, climate change, the impact of technology, you name it.
It's like having this roadmap that helps us navigate the present.
It helps us understand how we got here.
Because it shows us how we got here.
And where we might be headed.
And what to watch out for.
Exactly.
Okay, so as we wrap up our deep dive into Dr. Tabatabai's book, I want to touch on one final point that really resonated with me.
Okay.
We've talked about how he challenges traditional narratives of political thought.
Right.
Showing us how complex and interconnected it really is.
Absolutely.
But one thing that I found so refreshing is that he's not afraid to point out the limitations of this whole tradition.
You're right. He doesn't shy away from the fact that a lot of these thinkers were very much products of their time, and their ideas sometimes reflect the prejudices and inequalities of their societies.
So he's not giving us this, like, sanitized version of history, where everyone's a hero and every idea is perfect.
Exactly.
He's showing us the flaws, the blind spots.
He's challenging us to grapple with that complexity, to see the full picture.
Yeah, he acknowledges that it's a story of power.
Yeah.
Who gets to have a voice, who gets to define what's important, and whose experiences are ignored.
So we need to be critical readers of history. Not just taking these ideas at face value, but questioning them, looking for those missing voices.
Exactly. It's not enough to just know what these thinkers said. We have to ask ourselves why they said it, what their motivations were, and how those ideas have been used and sometimes misused throughout history.
That's a powerful way to approach it.
So it's about approaching the history of political thought with open eyes, recognizing both its brilliance and its limitations, and being open to different perspectives.
I think that's a great takeaway.
We've covered a lot of ground today, explored some really big and complex ideas, but I hope our listeners come away with this one key understanding: the history of political thought. It's not just an academic subject, it's a conversation that matters to all of us.
It's a conversation about the questions that have always driven us as human beings.
About power, about justice, about freedom, about what it means to live a good life. And ultimately, it's a conversation that we can all participate in, learn from, and contribute to.
And hopefully make a little bit better along the way.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.